Throw labels in until they give you money, right?
Yeah, you're right. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to season 3 of the Following Faith podcast. This series is called, what is it called? I forgot what it's called.
You tell me. You just told me to show up.
Okay, that's what it's called. It's called The Meal and a Conversation, where I get a guest and over a meal, we have a conversation, because I think it's the most genuine aspect where people actually are honest and can talk and get to know each other. You asked me to give you a little bit of taste of the African traditional food, and so today we have Bugatti, and we also have meat. It's chicken. I don't know if people already would see it, but while we're having a conversation, we'll be eating fufu and yama as well too. But yeah, so you can go ahead and dig in whenever you want. This guy can open up.
Yeah, I already pre-opened, so I wouldn't look back.
All right, and today on the first episode, I have my brother Trigg, but he goes by Justin. Maybe you can
Trigg.
Yeah, Trigg.
Yeah.
If you don't mind sharing a little bit about who you are, because I can go ahead and tell them a little bit, but I think it would be best if you told the people.
No, for sure. So, my name is Justin Trigg. I am a high school teacher. I grew up in Northern California. I moved out here for college. I went to GCU, graduated, and have been here ever since. Got married, have 2 children, and that's kind of the basics of who I am. So, yeah.
All right, Trigg. So I met you when I was a sophomore.
Correct.
In high school. You were my English teacher.
Absolutely.
And I quickly came to find out just now that I was your favorite student.
Yeah.
No. So you taught high school, you taught English.
Mm-hmm.
My first question is why English?
Why English? So as I was just kind of getting back to the beginning, why teaching a little bit. I never imagined myself as a teacher. I have begun to open up more with my students as the years go on, but I kind of thought as I was growing up, right, academia was forced upon me by my mother more than anything. I don't know how it was for you growing up, but for me, I didn't see many black men reading, right? Like black men in my life were like laborers. That was their career of choice. They would go, they would work with their hands. My dad would work security, he did landscaping. My stepdad worked in a chemical plant. Like these were the major black men in my life and around. I had uncles. One of my uncles went back to school after he got laid off, but for the most part, it wasn't like academia was a part of Black American culture. And so,
okay, before we continue, just because it's not, you're not doing it wrong. You can eat this however you want.
Okay.
But I think so. Usually, you grab the Bugatti and you grab a little ball like this. So, and then you usually take a bite of the meat, whatever source of protein there is.
Got you.
And then you eat that meat. And then in order to get the soup, because the flour is pretty dry, then you grab the ball that you already made, and then you dip it in the sauce. Okay. And then you eat it. It's definitely a lot more smoother. But you eat it however you want.
No, that's the correct way. I was waiting for you to eat more so that I could follow your lead, but you were embracing the conversation, so I was like, I'm gonna just go for however I can do it. But thank you. No, so yeah, I didn't grow up, so I thought for me, my mom forced me. She always told me I was going to school. Mm-hmm. So I just picked the most entertaining thing. I always told people, I was like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a lawyer. And that's what I thought I was going to be. That's what I was going to do. And I just and I literally just chose that because I had to pick something and they looked cool on TV. And so that's where I was as I was growing up. And so I just kind of forced that, right? It wasn't that I enjoyed that anymore. But I truly enjoyed in high school, my English and history classes. It was really history because I was gifted at it. I had a good memory. And then English, I really enjoyed. In 11th grade, we started to have more conversations about what life really was. And so I just kind of learned that was a place to have conversations. So I graduated high school thinking I was going to be a lawyer, entered pre-law in college, and first pre-law class I took, I said, this is terrible. It was mostly research. You got to talk about nothing. You researched old cases. You talked about like just stuff that I was like, this is boring. And you talk to lawyers, you would interview them, and they would be like, yeah, I spent 6 years before I ever entered the courtroom. I was just doing research for other lawyers or whatever. And that's not the case. I know that now there's more diversity in law, but I just was like, my experiences, I looked at it, and I also looked, I graduated high school in 2005. So we were just entering the recession at that time. And so things were falling apart.
Right.
And I was like, I need to find something that's stable, career. And I had started interning when I was a senior and a little bit after my freshman year in college with like a youth group. And I was like, oh, I really like talking to these kids. I wonder where have I had the best experiences in education? And there's also stability, because I had good experiences like in church, but I was like, I looked at like youth pastor and I was like, I can't like, and it was all like white hippie dudes like that were around me when I moved out here. And I was like, I can't, that's not me. Like them dudes, obviously that's not what every youth pastor looks like, but that's what I looked at. And I was like, nah, that's not me. And so I kind of looked for another way that I could interact with young people, but also like have a stable job, career, and start to move to support a family and things like that, because those things are important to me as well. So that's kind of how I entered. That's what I entered in English, like how I entered it, but it's become so much more to me since then.
Right.
Because I truly believe that reading fiction builds empathy, and empathy is one of the things that lacks most in our culture.
Okay, we're getting a little already to the trigger today, so let's take it back a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know. So you played sports.
Correct.
When you were younger. Right now you're currently doing. Okay, I have a question. What's the difference in? I know MMA stands for mixed martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
What does UFC stands for?
Ultimate Fighting Championship.
And aren't they just both trying to basically, in a sense, kill each other? Like I don't.
No. So mixed martial arts is a sport. UFC is a promotion. So it's like saying, when you say UFC, it's like saying NBA. And when you say MMA, it's like saying basketball.
Oh, okay.
So that's like the difference. That's what people like confuse. Like it's one of those things that's a running joke in like gyms, is when people are like, yeah, I train UFC. That's like saying, yeah, I train NBA. It's like, you don't really train NBA. Like that's like, you obviously don't know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the difference. But yeah, I actually didn't stumble upon that till much later in life. I played basketball all the way through junior high, through high school. And I kind of realized as I got later in high school, my team was really good. Mm-hmm. And we had like 4 or 5 guys play, like the starters at the time all went on to play college basketball. Now I was good enough to play high school basketball, but not good enough to get scholarship to play. I was good because I looked at basketball intellectually. It's how I look at most sports. And so I look at things intellectually, and that's what gives me success. Is usually I have a better grasp on the situations, moving quickly, and my mind keeps me ahead to keep up with athletes that are actually more athletically talented than me.
So how do you get into MMA?
So in college, I was playing basketball, and I started hiking just to stay in shape. Mm-hmm. I got the typical, what do they call it, the freshman 15, when you go into college and you stop playing sports and you don't do anything, you gain like 15 pounds. Mine was like 40. Mm-hmm. So like I didn't play sports. I didn't do anything my senior year, didn't do anything. And so I was like, I need to get back in shape. Like that was kind of where I was at. And so that's what I started doing. And I was just bored. Like I missed competition. But I hate like recreational basketball. It is the most trash type of sport you can play. Recreational, adult, anything is just terrible.
Yeah.
In general, yeah. Well, when you're good, it's dangerous, mm-hmm. right? And it's just terrible. Like the egos and stuff. Like it's just nothing that I wanted to be a part of. So I did it for a while. But even like church league, they all sucked to me. Like it was just like not like the people sucked, but the experience was not like mm-hmm. good. And so I was just like, this is not the avenue. So I just by happenstance, a couple of people from my church were um, going. They had opened up this new gym called Knockout Fitness. It was down the road, and they had like cardio boxing classes and they had jujitsu classes. So I started out doing cardio boxing, and it was just I was like, oh, I'm kind of natural at this. Like it really is more natural to me than even basketball was. Like how I move my feet, how I was able to kind of catch up. I was surpassing people that like were in these classes and starting to work more and more closely with the instructors. And then I went to a few jujitsu classes. I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like I really enjoy this. Like I think I'm pretty good at this.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of ballooned from there. Like I went from training with people that were members to training with the people that were trainers to one of the trainers being like, man, you should try to fight. And it just kind of ballooned from there. And
okay, so we were talking one time. You said you wish you would have started fighting like a lot sooner.
I was able to wrestle in high school, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Funny story. When I was in high school, we were at like an assembly, and I was with the basketball team. My cousin was one of those players that he played at San Francisco State, played D2. This was when I was riding the bench, like not doing anything. He turns to me, he's like, "You're an athlete. You should just go wrestle. I bet you'd be really good at it." And I looked at the wrestling team, and I was like, "Them dudes is weird. Like they wear like leotards. They're at the assembly. Like they're all goofy. They're muscular looking, but strong." But I was like, one of the dudes who was on there like couldn't walk and different things like and I was just like, nah, that's not really my thing. Like I'm not. It has like this stigma of being gay, right? Like it's like this thing like, oh, you want to wrestle around with men, and like that's the stigma behind it. But if you're ever in a wrestling room, there is nothing gay about it. Like you are fighting for your life. Like you don't have time to think about what parts of you are where. You are trying to fight for your life because this other man is going to put your head into the floor.
Right.
And so, and it's not what people typically think, right? And so that's kind of why I avoided it. But as I got to know it, like I've been to wrestling rooms since. Like when I decided to fight, before I took my first fight, I spent the summer in Sierra Linda's wrestling room, just learning and wrestling and becoming like a wrestler, a grappler. Even though my strength is striking, that was what I wanted to learn to be a wrestler, because if you're a wrestler, you decide where the fight goes, and that's a big part. Like wherever you're going to be successful, that's where you want the fight to be, whether on the feet or on the ground.
Okay, so I think what's interesting with MMA or boxing in general, one of the big things you want to talk about while we're training is the individuality of the sport, and how whether you win or lose, it's really determined by your own training, right? And you have no one to blame. Whereas the 5-on-5 sports, it's almost like you have all the excuses in the world. My question: how important do you feel like to be able to understand that you don't even have to fight for all your life, right? You don't have to, but you just be able to understand and be able to take it. Hey, this is my responsibility, and putting it on yourself. How important is that for you been throughout your life as you've gotten older? I guess I would say.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like that's what drew me to the sport. Is there is no like I don't care. There is basketball players, football players, baseball, whatever they want to say, right? Every guy who plays or girl who plays a sport thinks their sport is the hardest or the toughest or whatever. But there's very little that you can say to a person who's willing to lock themselves in like a cage or a ring or something like that. And the only way you get out of there is your time is up, or you have been relieved of your consciousness, or your opponent has been relieved of their consciousness. So there's no other like way to, there's no escape. There's no like in football, you take a play off, maybe you get hit hard or you don't give it your all or something like that, or basketball, you don't give it your all, you can be removed from consciousness at any moment, and that's what you're stepping into. There is no purer competition than deciding who is the better person. When you're locked in that cage, when you're locked in that ring, the better person leaves whole, usually, unless it was back and forth, right? And the person who didn't come in there either less prepared, less skilled. It's not always your fault. Sometimes you're just less skilled, right? But you still, it's on your shoulders. And like everybody else is there to support you and lift you up,
Right.
but you're the only one that could captain the ship.
Yeah.
The ship sinks. It's on you, right? Like nobody else was in there with you. They locked everybody else out, right? You can scream. As a coach, right? I coach MMA, everything. I corner people. I can scream all I want.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing I can do to save you if you're just being pummeled in there. There is literally a wall that's between me saving you, right? Like there's nothing I can do. There's no way I can help you. You must help yourself.
Right.
And so yeah, it's just the purest form of competition, in my opinion. There's no way that you can say, like, there's another sport that's like, hey, this is a pure form of competition. Like, it can't be, because it's all you.
Right.
You are competing one against another person. And it doesn't matter. There's no environment, whatever you want to say, that can stop you from being like the better here, right? Like you can complain about whatever you want. The other person's in those exact same conditions as you. They can move everywhere you want them to move, right? There's no excuses.
Okay, so my question, so let's say I'm an outsider looking in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying, well, it doesn't make any sense. I think it's a dumb sport because it's so dangerous. Why would I put myself in a situation like that to be able to get
removed from
consciousness? Yeah, right? What would you say is the biggest misconception of MMA or boxing or sports that
have that?
Yeah, that have that.
I think that the biggest misconception is people think it's not a sport because it's brutal, right? And brutality doesn't remove the eligibility of it being a sport, right? Like just because somebody can get bleeding, you can do that in any sport. It's just the object of the game in mixed martial arts or boxing or kickboxing or any of Muay Thai, any of those sports, right? It's what it's about. Now, because something is brutal doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. And like there's an art to what it is, right? Mixed martial arts. Now, people think because there's an emphasis on the martial, right? The violence of it, that it negates the art of it. Well, when you watch someone move and you actually step in there and just even trying to hit mitts or go and shadow box or something, you realize that there's techniques and art to it, that you don't just have to be the biggest, strongest person. The biggest, strongest person loses a lot in mixed martial arts, right? Like right now, there's a 185-pound champion is Israel Adesanya, is a Nigerian guy, right? That relocated to New Zealand. And he is just tall and skinny. And you would just think like he would get crushed by these bigger, more muscular guys, right? He fought a guy, Paulo Costa, that was just huge, like way bigger than him. You would think he's going to get crushed. He knocked him out in under 2 rounds, right? This tall, skinny Nigerian knocks him out. Now, obviously, he's an athlete, but the biggest, strongest person doesn't always win.
Right.
There's a technique, there's an art. And, like, that's the thing about Israel Adesanya. He's one of the best artists. He's in there, and it's an art for him to strike with people, to make them miss where he punishes them and hurts them. And that's one of the things that's beautiful when you can see it, and you can see that there's technique and interesting. I would say that like those people who say like it's not a sport because of brutality, a lot of times those people are football fans, and you're just running at somebody full speed and running into them, like, and you call that a sport. While I am trying to avoid damage while giving somebody else damage, you accept damage as part of your game, right? And it's just because we have a different mentality. And I think that's what people don't understand, is they don't understand the art to it. They've never tried, right? Like, they used to say like 95% of the population has never really been in a fist fight, right? And don't understand what it takes, like, to actually throw a punch at a person with bad intentions, to move out of the way of a punch. Everybody imagines themselves, especially in this next generation. You play too many video games, like, you think that you can do everything, and then when it's there, most people always say fight or flight, right? Like most people, it's flight.
Right.
Like it's flight. Like I don't care what person, you could be the biggest, strongest person. It's hard for it not to be flight for people, because we have softened ourselves as a society as far as conflict. We avoid it. It's avoidable. So that's just kind of like my opinion of it. And when people criticize it, it's clearly you don't understand the skill. not only physically but mentally that it takes to be in there and be in a fight and not be in there to just be in there for violence sake, but be in there to perform at the highest level and show that you are the highest level in all elements, in wrestling and boxing and kickboxing and Muay Thai.
Just the last few questions because I'll ask. Because I think this is part is intriguing. So a lot of people make the assumption that people that do MMA or UFC and do these violent sports happen to be really aggressive outside of it. But I've quickly came to realize that those people that are actually really good at it and take their sport very seriously, like MMA I'm talking about, are actually really gentle and really patient people because they understand the damage they can do. I'm kind of curious for you to kind of talk a little bit about that perspective and where people kind of misunderstand that stereotype.
Yeah. So, I don't know where I heard this, but it goes around a lot in the MMA community, right?
Mm-hmm.
It talks about like being peaceful, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't be peaceful if you're not dangerous. Okay. How do you choose peace if you can't actually inflict war, right? And so, like, if you are not a dangerous person, you're not peaceful, you're just not dangerous, right? And so, like, you can't choose peace. Right. We who train, we know what danger is, we know what danger, like, can be caused and inflicted, and we on a regular basis choose to operate in a society that chooses peace, right? And we choose peace. We could take advantage of most of the population, anybody almost who's not armed, right? I feel like I can get the better of in a physical altercation, but I choose not to. Imposing people physically is not something you would choose to do because you realize that, yes, you can do that, but that's not bettering yourself or others. It's not bettering anybody. And most people who actually are dangerous know that.
Yeah.
But, like, you can't call yourself a peaceful person. Look how violent this guy is. He's whatever. And he must be aggressive. And it's like, no, that person understands danger more than you ever will. It's the same thing with people who are soldiers or police officers or firefighters. They understand danger at a level that most of us never will, right? And they can be dangerous people, and they can also understand, like, how dangerous the world can be. Yeah. And having that type of perspective when you are a person and choosing peace shows that takes a stronger person.
Right.
And, like, if you're not that strong, if you're a person that actually chooses violence all the time, you're not in an MMA cage, you're usually in jail. Like, you haven't fit into society. These are not, aggressive people don't end up in MMA cages. Aggressive people often end up in jail because they can't control their aggression. Now, controlling when you use your athleticism, when to be aggressive, when not to be, controlling, like having the mental fortitude to say, like, I can always fight. I choose not to on a regular basis is way better than most of the, like, community or the world. Like, as you look at it, it's like most of people who choose to fight, they let their emotions rule what they do, right? Like, they don't mentally choose to train or choose to, they're like, I'm really angry, I need to punch this person. And it's like, you've lost all mental fortitude at that point. Like, you've lost all mental fortitude. Why would you punch somebody? Like, clearly you don't know, like, what you're capable of or what the other person's capable of. You've let your emotions take over. You don't have the mental capacity to understand what being dangerous is and how danger works in our society.
You know, I think that whole perspective, I think it correlates with why I think I appreciate having a conversation with you. I think it kind of coincides with this. You and I are able to have conversations when it comes to spiritual or spirituality, and we have differences, but we're able to actually have a conversation over it because, one, you have your own understanding and you're comfortable in it, right? You know the material, you've studied it on your own, and you've had that perspective, right? Just like with MMA, you've trained, you've known the danger, and so whenever you go to have a conversation with that person, you can choose now, right, to have a civilized conversation. And there's a few people who I appreciate this a lot about. You might have more knowledge than I do, but you don't choose to belittle me with that knowledge, right? You just use it to communicate with me, and we have a civilized conversation on a topic that most people choose to fight about. So I think that scenario kind of translates in your everyday life on how willing you are to not really be ignorant to a situation, right? To learn about it and to try to master it to the best of your ability. So that's what I really appreciate about our conversations is that we're able to have them without getting in a fist fight.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I think that's one, it kind of goes back to this like weird thing, right? That how am I like English teacher and a fighter, right? They seem like opposites, but really like I said, you can't, once you are well read, and especially if you're well read in fiction and nonfiction, but you're well read, I think that you can choose to empathize with others way easier, right? Like I always say, I tell my students often that there's two ways to truly gain empathy, right? And the first way is to travel immensely and embed yourself into different cultures that are not yours, right? But that is extremely expensive and unrealistic for most people. Well, the next best way is to read. Read about other cultures and society. And a lot of times people choose to read nonfiction. Well, when people choose nonfiction, they choose things that they can identify with, right? That fits their arguments, that fits their motives, that fits their motivations. Most nonfiction, people use it for self-embetterment, right? Not to learn about others and other culture and other society and other, they don't do that. You use fiction for that. A lot of times you're exposed to other cultures and society through fiction because they're like, you never know what perspective. You don't look at a fiction book and there's not a picture of the author on the front, right? There's nothing that there's no barrier. And so these authors can slip emotions and experiences into you through fiction that you may never have. And so you can learn to empathize with other cultures through fiction and so now, like, I don't ever have to get angry or have to belittle. I know because I'm well read that it doesn't matter whether somebody's 12 or 82, they can teach me something because it's not about everybody has a different experience than me, right? Everybody has different emotions. I can learn, like I learn all the time from my 5-year-old about like, what do I do with emotions? I am not like a shower of emotions and he is. And so I have to learn from him every day. What does it mean when you are an emotional person? How do you communicate? What can I learn from him? He's an intellectual and an emotional intellectual at that, and I don't know how to handle that all the time. And I have to learn that balance, and I learn from him. And you can do that with anybody, but if you already establish who you are, and begin to reject everyone else's, and you lack empathy. And that's one of the things, like, people who are like, oh, I can't get into fiction, or I can't get, and it's a lot of times because they're unwilling to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Like, it's hard to walk emotionally through someone else's shoes. It's difficult to do, especially in a culture with men, especially where you're not supposed to be emotional. You're not supposed to have emotions. And if you do, you better only show them behind closed doors. Right. Like, there's maybe one or two people that you get to shed one tear, like, in public, and that's it. And then somebody better have died. Like, that's how it goes with, like, men in our culture, in many cultures, right? But I think that as we learn as a culture, there's balance, right? Like, you can be a strong man, but still be empathetic, still be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I've come to the realization, one of the things that I believe, and this is just my personal opinion, a lot of times, or I'll ask you this, what do you think the opposite of empathy is? What would be the opposite of empathy?
I would say selfishness.
Selfishness? Yeah, I think you're onto it. Most people will say apathy, right? Like, selfishness, I think, is a lot closer. But I would take it one step further and say, like, narcissism. Because empathy is where you take yourself completely out of it. You put yourself completely into somebody else's emotions and experiences, and you feel it with them, right? You feel it with them. While narcissism is you manipulate others' emotions, experiences in order to promote yourself, right? And so now it takes it one step further than selfishness, in the sense that you're no longer just like promoting yourself and rejecting others. You're manipulating others in order to promote yourself. And so like that's really, and I think our society is moving in that direction. There's an extreme lack of empathy in our society and our leadership and lots of things that go on in our culture because it's becoming more important to promote yourself and manipulate others to do so than it is to actually empathize with people that you may not know or agree with. And
I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to do this podcast in this sense, right? Where we're having a meal and a conversation. Because I think that's another big thing that we're liking is the conversational aspect, right? To just be able to, how are you able to put yourself in someone else's shoes if you don't even know what those shoes look like, what size they are, where they're from, what they look like? You're not even willing to just sit down and have this meaningful conversation with them without putting yourself in the midst of it, right? So, but before we move on, you were talking about, I'm always intrigued. Why is it that we're always equating emotion with crying, right? Because I think we like to use it for black men, but also black women. But there's so much more to emotions than just crying, right? There's that when you get so tired, you just don't even, like, you want to be able to show it, right? But too often times, you're supposed to be strong, right? You're not allowed to be tired. You're allowed to be, you're supposed to be up tempo all the time, ready to go. That strong black man, black woman, whatever you want to call it. I think we're so focused on the tear and the crying. Yes, I think that's a really big part of it, right? But what about those other emotions that come along with it?
Well, I think that you're right. But I think that the emotion of sadness is the only one that's truly equated with weakness.
Okay.
And so it's rejected in our society a lot of times, right? Tiredness, people can understand that. People don't outright reject it, right? Even something, there are lots of things, but sadness, depression are perceived as weakness. And so I think like a lot of times that's the focus because that's the most actively rejected in our society and especially among black people. And it's one of the things as you look, and it's a little bit different, I would say, as far as like my background and your background in the sense that you have like an immigrant, right, background, while I have, call it, right, BIPOC, right, Black, Indigenous, people of color, right, BIPOC, whatever you call it, say, right, like that background. So there's this history that I have, right, and I was stripped of my attachments to like Africa originally in my like ancestry. And so I think like black people have created their own culture in America, right? And I think that some of it was out of necessity, and some of the things that were necessary early on may not be as necessary now, right? But it's hard, right? Like it's hard to change in the short amount of time that there has been freedom, right? Like we're not talking about like generations and generations and like we're talking about that my family tree, I lose track after excuse me, my great great grandfather was Handy Trigg. His father was, I believe, John Anderson Trigg, and before that I have no records of anybody before that, right? And so to have that like limitation, right, on my background, my culture, and things like that, that's how close I am, right, to that. And to me, it's, there was a time all the way, I would say, through my grandpa before he passed, right, would have been older than Emmett Till. So we're not as separated as we think from having to put on a show for, and so it's this balance of like, what is Black culture going to be in America? We have been torn for a while. It was surely focused on freedom, right? After that, it was focused on equality. And is it still that? Like, is it something different? Do we have time to embrace what we've been or who we're becoming it's just complicated. And so it's truly hard for me to understand. I even to this day, like I don't know that I understand my grandpa in the sense that what did it mean not to show sadness to him? What were the consequences for him of showing sadness? I'll never know. I try my best to understand, but I'll never know. So of course he's the one who trained my dad. His dad was a sharecropper, right? Like my grandpa's dad was a sharecropper. So what do I know, right? What do I know about that? And so he trained my dad trained me, and that's what I learned. And so I just don't know like what is culture and what is like unhealthy habits, right? And so I just don't know. I'm always learning, right, about it. But my dad, he rejects showing sadness as weakness to him, right?
What would you say to? Because I think this is another. So with that whole, at what point do we cut it off in our own generation, right? So now that we've recognized that, okay, the showing of sadness equating to weakness is not really a bad thing, and it's not really weakness if you're just sad and want to cry and you're depression, things of that nature. We can try to help, get your help, whatever. Instead of passing that down to the next generation, because I think especially with my culture, there's a lot of things that have been getting passed down from generation to generation. And it's almost like, yeah, well, we're not fighting the same things our parents were fighting back then, right? I understand what they were doing back then, but in order for us to see some type of change, we, as the next generation, we have to cut it off. We have to cut the hate off here, or try our best. I don't know what that looks like, but then also, how do you show empathy? I guess you would say to our parents also, who I hear a lot of young kids saying, my mom and my dad just don't understand me, and honestly, I can't even disagree with them. I felt the same way too, right? But as I get older and recognize it, man, my mom did the best that she could with what she had, right? Even though I don't fully agree with what she's doing now or what she was, how she did it, but she did what she could with what she had. How do we, one, show empathy to our parents, but how do we find a way to at least happen that? I just don't even know how we would do it, but just kind of curious from your perspective and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think I struggle with this. So this is gonna sound crazy arrogant. I'm sorry, mom or dad, if you guys watch this, but I think that I am intellectually further than both of my parents. I am more learned. However, I will never have more experience. Right? So I believe that I know more. I've been better educated, right? I know more as far as my educational background in knowing. Now, what does that mean for our relationship? It's very unique, right? It's like when you look out upon culture, right? We're in a unique spot. And I think even in your culture, this is true, but in all cultures in America and everywhere, we're in a unique position where we're slowly getting away from like, hey, you are no longer valuable when you lose your ability to labor, right? Like that's slowly going away. So, but what does that mean for the passing down of responsibilities, head of household? Like, what does that all mean, right? So when you look and you think now, like you and your brothers are now like grown, have careers, financially independent. I would say most of you, right? And you have this like independence, but what does that mean? When do you shift to becoming the head of household over your mother, right? Like when, and head of household now means something different, like, right? Like it's not that you, like, it's not old, like ancient ways where it's like now it used to be your mother and your father's house and now it's your house because you're the primary breadwinner. Like that, especially in America, has gone away, right? We got nursing homes and things like all of these things, like that tradition has gone away. So what does it mean? And like I think as I reflect on that, I think that's the more I ask that question, the better it helps me to identify with my parents, because it makes me make sure that my actions are not out of pride, but out of what's best for our relationship, what's best for both of us. And so when I say things, I realized, like, when I was your age, I was doing it wrong. Like 10 years ago, for me, I wanted to flash my like intellectual superiority. I wanted to prove, like, nah, I'm the man now. I'm the one, like, I'm doing better. I'm doing good, right? Like, but now, as I look at it, for me, it's like, what's going to be, where can I help you and where can you help me? Where can I use things that I've learned to help you, and where can I value your experiences to help me, and how can we work together to become a more strong family? And I think if I make every decision to make us a better and stronger family, then I don't have to worry about roles and who did what or what. Like, I just let it be how it is, and that's how I can truly, like you said, it's so hard to understand where they come from, right? And it's hard not to, like, be like, you're old, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, this isn't like 1985 anymore. Like, things don't work this way or that way. It's hard not to, like, say that to your parents, right? But but at the same time, it's like, there are many times where they have valuable experiences that now if we reject them as a whole, we lose, right? Like, we lose as people. We're not gonna grow. And so it's finding that balance. So I just now am intentional, and that's really like what I do with my faith, what I do with teaching, what I do with everything is like, how are we both like going to grow from this? It's not about winning and losing. It's about growth. Right. And in every relationship, if both of us aren't growing, it's a bad relationship. And so if I'm not helping my parents grow and they're not helping me grow, it's a bad relationship. She's got like an 18-minute TED Talk. It's going to speak to your soul. It's called Danger of a Single Story. I show it, since I've seen it, I show it to my students every year.
Hey, what's the, what's the, like, why is it so?
So it's like impactful because she talks about how we as people will create a single story about a culture, society, or person based on like one perspective. So that's what single story is you have one perspective. So she talks about how when she came to America, her roommate was like, was already feeling bad for her because she was from Africa. So she had the single story of like African starvation, right? And so she was like shocked when she knew how to use a stove. And she asked her to play her tribal music, and she busted out Mariah Carey. And she's like, how did you learn to speak English so well? And she was shocked when I said Nigeria's primary language is English. And so there's just like, she goes into like what this means. What does it mean to be to have a single story? And so it's a powerful TED Talk. I really enjoy it. And I think it increases the perspective on, like, as you look and are trying to embrace all of what culture is, she says something that I think is like often like glazed over. People don't catch it, but she's like, one of the worst ways to start a story is secondly. And that's like very powerful to me, right? Because she gives examples like when you talk about like, I don't know, she gives like great examples, but like what I always think of is like a lot of times people point to like when they talk about Black people, people point to the poverty being of their own like volition, essentially, because there'll be like single parent homes or things like that. well, that's starting a story with secondly, right? Like, what was why is that taking place? Like, why is there primary single parent homes? Oh, well, like, they live in areas in which you can't support a family of one income. And so, like, there's obviously a reason. And what we talked about, the issue of not being able to share emotions, men would rather leave than deal with the emotional fortitude of not being able to support their own family. It's much easier emotionally to leave, right? Like,
I have a question for you though. When it comes to I understand the importance of tribes, right? Because I think we all long for and seek tribe in one form or another, right? Whether you go to high school and you find your little clique, I consider those little small tribes, right? Because you want to fit in with people that you're alike, that like what you like, eat what you eat, talk the way you talk. But then I think it takes away from that perspective, right? The perspective of, oh, there's actually so much more out there than what you think and what you like.
Yeah, I think that it's, so I think that I've caught it in reverse of what your experiences are. I think that, like, you have probably had a lot of access throughout your life to people like you, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you have a community here, right? That you've attracted each other, right? Like, you as Africans have found your pocket, your space, your right? And then you not only have that, but like you have now this new pocket in like more social circles of African Americans, and like finding that pocket of, oh, okay, you're not exactly like me, but we might share similar like music or the way we talk or the way, style, whatever it is, right? So like I lost almost all of that in college. So like there were maybe like 3 people like me at my church, in my school, anywhere. So I had like, I didn't realize the value of it until it was gone, right? Like I remember like looking up at after like, and this is just like late, right? Like looking up after things were happening where like Black people started to be killed. Like it started with like Trayvon Martin, right? And I looked around and everybody close to me that like I would share these conversations with were white. I had nobody. My closest Black friend was an African immigrant. I had no like Black indigenous people of color in my inner circle. I felt stranded, like stranded in my own thoughts and mourning and grieving and anger, and I was just stuck in it. All of the people that I like, there's no way that they could understand, right? And it was just like this feeling of like, man, because I rejected that, like what you're talking about. It's like, oh man, this clicking up thing is like toxic. And it can be, like, don't get me wrong, it can be, but there's also the value of when your culture is hurting, to have somebody that hurts with you. Like there's value in that, right? Like I don't know all of the ins and outs of like cultural pain you go through and related to your like country of origin and all of those things, like, but when it happens, you have a community, right? Like it's and it might not always be perfect, and maybe it gets toxic, and maybe it gets, but like if something truly tragic happens, like you all cry, you all mourn, you all grieve, right? Where it goes after that, it can get crazy, right? Like who knows? Like there can be people who are angry and take it, like all kinds of like, and that's where you need the perspective of joining other people, right? Like branching out. And so I think there's true value in both, right? having that, like, people that are like you, because I didn't realize until things were truly going wrong and I didn't have anybody, it was like, oh man, there was value in that. And I also didn't realize that I was rejecting that because I had bought in to the negative talk about the Black community in the late 90s and early 2000s. It's ghetto, it's uneducated. I rejected it. I said, I am not that. I am not. I let, like, it's one of my biggest regrets, like in that time period of my life of late high school, early college, is I let, like, white people around me talk bad about my own people and let them do that to the point that I realized when it wasn't okay anymore, people were shocked at my rejection of it. And I had to, like, look and be like, oh man, like, that's on me. Like, I let you believe it was okay to talk bad about this culture because I felt bad. I rejected it. I rejected it as a part of me, and I rejected that piece of me and my culture. So yeah, I just think there's value in both. It's like, I think there's a fear, right, of that unhealthy cycle and having that what is it, like having a echo chambers, right, where if everybody thinks the same as you, then you're talking to somebody and it's like they're, oh yeah, they agree. It feels good to have somebody who's just like you and nobody who challenges you, but you don't grow, right? Like we talked about relationships and growing. You don't grow in that, and so it's important to venture out of that, but it's also important to be able to go back when things are hard, when tragedy truly strikes. Like, I even looked in my own family, right? Like, I had very few people. I'm mixed. My mom is white, my dad is Black, but in my own family, I had very few people that I kind of identified with and was able to talk about. So yeah, I think I'm with you. I don't know the solution to it or the proper balance. I think there has to be balance. You can't do all the way what I did, right? But you can be. I'm sure what frustrates you is people who are in those echo chambers where they're only hearing themselves talk. It's just a bunch of yous, and you're all in agreement because you're talking. Because nobody has a different opinion. Nobody's challenging you. And so, yeah, I don't know that there's a solution or an answer, but I just know that there's value in both, and I haven't figured out how to balance that value.
My thing is that I always feel like I'm the one that's always opposing what everyone else is talking about, right? I feel like I just happen to not be, at least at this point in my life, right? Now, when I was younger, like you stated earlier, I was more quiet. You wouldn't really be able to recognize it. There was still a little bit of that arrogance, I guess, you could say. But it was almost like, I didn't say much, right? You weren't going to see me out there fighting for any cause or trying to pick a fight or anything like that. But like now growing up, I think it does come with a little bit more information, right? Not being so ignorant to situations that you're willing to be like, oh, this is kind of, I don't know how you got that thought reading that, or this scenario, this is your solution. Really, like, if we think about it in a logical sense, like, this is not how you should go, in my opinion, right? So I'm always feeling like I'm always the opposite, right? And to your statement, you feel like, looking back at that part of your life, you wish you would have been able to stand up more for your people, right? But now let's take it back to a different scenario, right? I know this is a different world, but let's say you're with other Black people, right? And I'm only saying this from this because, and all they're talking about is they're okay with the environment that they're living in, right? Like they're okay. Let's just bring it more into perspective, right? So I was gracious with a godfather and a godmother who one part of the African community, right? So when we first came to the States, somehow my mom got into contact with my godfather and my godmother, right? And they were very well educated, and so whenever we go to their house, they would teach us and they would educate us, because my mom was a single mother of 10 kids. She really couldn't take care of all of us or spend that many time, right? So we were able to learn how to speak properly, read a little bit better than most, but still didn't read as great. But a few times, but then we'll go back into that other environment, because you can see the total difference, right, from the area that we were living in, and then going to the suburbs where everyone else was living. You're almost like, I feel like I'm in a different world, right? Sometimes I'm like, I don't think I belong here. You felt more comfortable here because everyone looked like you. How can you still be able, how do you push forward in that environment, right? Like, it's so tough to be able to communicate with young kids nowadays, at least from my perspective. So I was in your position, I know what you're talking about, but just because this is what your environment is saying, it doesn't mean it's always the truth, right? But it's almost like that's what they're telling me, and they're my people, and so it's, in their mind, it's correct. How do you fight against that? What do you say to that? How do you live that? How do you go about that scenario?
Yeah, I think like I said, for me, I don't know that I have a perfect answer, but I think that it's when you truly you have to be careful with your language and how you talk to people, because what they're rejecting is the idea that they're lesser, right? Whether their actions don't make them lesser, you're trying to change their actions. However, if you're not careful about how you speak about those actions, you speak about you make the person feel like they're lesser than these people because they're making different choices and they're moving forward and they're doing things that are moving their culture, keeping their culture successful, and you're not doing things. And so that becomes not you and your choices are wrong, it becomes you as a person are wrong. And so you have to be careful about the language you use. And I think this is something that I'm even still learning to this day. When I went, one of the most powerful things when I went on that Southern States trip is we went on a tour of a plantation that was one of two plantations in the nation that is used as a museum, as a way to memorialize and educate people about what slavery was. There's only two. There are thousands of plantations all over now. There's two that memorialize and honor the history of what slavery is, right? But the tour guide was the COO of the whole thing, so we were fortunate to get and she actually traveled with us a little bit. And one of her big things was, we have to change the way that we talk about slavery. And one of the most basic things is, we are taught to call people slaves. Well, that makes slavery an identity. So what you have to do is change the language. You say enslaved people. These people weren't born slaves. As soon as they were born, they were enslaved. They were put into, there was an action of a people that decided to enslave them. Slavery is not their identity, it's what was done to them. And I think that simple click over changed, just hearing that, being oh, that's how you should talk about these people. That honors them so much more than calling them slaves, right? And what it did was realize that we have to be careful of the language that we use, right? When we call people criminals, or when we call people ghetto, or when we start to make their actions a part of their identity, they're immediately going to reject whatever we have to say that goes along with it, right? And so in our criticisms, although we may be genuine in intention, our words are hurting these people because we're adding negativity to their identity. And if we're not careful with the words that we use, they're going to reject us. So I'm very intentional about how I speak to people, and I think that's as far as, I don't know that that's going to advance them, but it makes it so that I'm not rejected from too many people, right? They're at least going to invite me to be a part of the conversation, because I will try not, right? It's obviously been ingrained in me since little, but I try not to use these terms that make actions a part of identity. Every person should feel valued. Every person should feel loved. I believe that. and their actions should not change those two things. Should not change that you should feel valued, and it should not change that you should feel loved, no matter what those actions are. Doesn't matter if they're the worst of the worst. You should feel valued and you should feel loved. And if I do anything that imposes on your value or your feeling of loved, that's on me.
Okay, do you feel like, because when you were younger and you were trying to reject those stereotypes of what they would think a black person was, do you wish that there was someone like you right now with that same thought process and addressing you with that same language, and that way when you were younger? Do you think that's kind of helped you get to this point as you've grown? And then also with your, okay, you can answer that question first.
Yeah. So I think it would have just helped me. I think I didn't have, so the only positive black role models I had were black women in my life growing up. And I would say that, like, my stepdad was a great role model as far as character-wise. He was a very good character. My dad was a great role model in working, but nobody that was, like, in my lane, which I felt like was, like, being prized as somebody who was intellectual. Like, as I was, there were very few black men, and even still in my profession now, there are very few black men who choose to study, to be in education, to choose that path. And so I think that I felt as though, like, so if I had, like, to look at my two main roles, my father and my stepfather, right? Both great. Like, my dad, I really truly believed he taught me, like, hard work. He was always, like, working. He always promoted hard work. And my stepdad, like, he was very humble, treated everybody with love and respect. And, like, there was, like, these two different role models, right? But as I looked at them and, like, tried to glean whatever I could from them, I don't know that, like, I had their, like, culturally, I don't know that I had a voice that was speaking strong and really telling me, like, what black culture was.
Right.
I didn't have that voice. With my dad, I think he, like, some things he loved, some things he hated. Like, he was very, like, passionate about the things he loved and even more passionate about the things he hated.
Right.
Very critical of young black people. While my stepdad was very accepting of everybody, but not really embracing of black culture. I would say that I can't think of many times where I was like, oh, like, would see him with a bunch of black people. Like, I didn't have, like, a picture of what does it mean to be, like, healthy and embracing black culture, right? I didn't have a picture of that. And so, like, I don't know that me by myself, I think we need more positive examples of what healthy black culture looks like. I think that there aren't enough good examples, and I don't know that any one person can do it, right? Like, but I think every time you have an opportunity to build it, you should add, right? You should try, right? And so if you see something going positive, like, I think we don't do enough of pushing the positive. We usually try to limit the negative.
Right.
Like, a lot of times we're like, oh, like, look at your music, look at your clothes, you'll never get a job this way, look at how you talk. Like, we, like, rather than embracing some of the positive things and putting some of the emphasis there, because if you truly, like, it happens with anybody, and I've learned this as parenting and as a teacher, right? I could, like, give you consequences for something negative or talk bad to you about something negative, and I can probably make you feel pretty bad in the moment, maybe even make you feel bad for a long time. But guilt is a slow changer of behavior, and it doesn't always have intended positive effects, right? And
usually comes, even if it changes your behavior for the better, it comes at devaluing your self-worth, right? So when you feel guilty, you a lot of times devalue that like self-worth. You're like, oh man, like, of course, like, yeah, no, I was doing wrong, and now I'm a terrible person, and I'm gonna stop doing that. And then every time you think about doing that thing, oh, I'm a bad person. Like, yeah, it's changing your behavior for the better, but is it changing you for the better, right? And, yeah. So to answer your question off camera, what does fatherhood look like to me? I think fatherhood is one of the like easiest things to me. Like it's tiring, it's exhausting, it's like extremely draining, but I'm never not motivated to do it.
Right.
And so like I am always motivated to balance, like to do better for my kids, or to have my kids experience better. The balance that I have to like have, there's like two true balances that I like struggle with. One is I think that there was natural character building. There were times where they legitimately couldn't afford for me to have something or afford for me to do something. My sons are not like really in that position. Like my wife and I have put ourselves in a financial position to be, especially for young kids. Obviously, when they get older, if my son wants a Corvette, like I can't afford a Corvette, most likely, right? But we've made some financial decisions to put ourselves in a place that we're financially stable, that nearly anything a 5-year-old wants, we can say yes, right? Like we can buy half the toys, but is that character building, right? You don't want to raise little jerks, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so that's one of the balances. It's wanting to build your kids' characters, so wanting to make good men, right, and sons, but also like as a parent, you want to give them all the things that you couldn't have, that you didn't have, that you and that's what you want to pass. So you have to live with this balance. The other balance I think that I really have to deal with is like, I think that it's important for me to love my family and put time and effort in my family, but if that shuts off the love and care that I can give to like others outside of my family, then I'm not living what I believe is my purpose, right? Like, I believe that, like there can be an element of selfishness when you put time, because like I said, fatherhood is easy for me. It's easy. It feels good to help my kids, but also like I do need to be contributing to my community and my church and my friends and others. Like my wife, like I need to like still give time to all of that, and having that balance of like making sure that I am always doing what's best for my kids, but also still not losing what my purpose is in this world, and truly giving myself to others and my kids, and giving everything to them and still having more to give to everyone else, right? It's a difficult balance to keep. But yeah, that's kind of my struggles in parenting, but I love it. I love spending time with my kids. Like I said, it's the easiest thing in the world. It definitely has its difficult times, but I'm never like, oh man, like this whole parenting thing, I shouldn't have done that. Like I never feel that way. That's why it's funny. Like I don't know. I saw like I don't know. My wife sent me some on Instagram or whatever, right? And it's like this lady was like, oh, what do you like? How much like do you love parenting? And she's like, parenting sucks. And if you told me that I had to parent anybody else's kids but mine, I would never take that job. But my kids are awesome. I love them to death. Right. If you told me that I had to parent my kids and that was my job, I would choose that 100 out of 100 times. And that's how I feel. Like it's hard, it's draining, it's all of those things. But I choose it every time. because I love it so much. I love them so much. And so I think there's something that God puts in you that like really makes you like you would never choose to do that for anybody else.
All right. First and foremost, I would like to thank you for coming on the podcast, man. You're the first guest, so I truly appreciate it. Secondly, I would have to second that comment where you said that you have to the balance of trying to show love to other people and spreading it out. I would say you did that with me, and I think that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on at least this season of the podcast, because of one, you being willing to train me and taking the time and be patient, and a bunch of learning curves. Boxing was definitely not what I thought it was, and thanks to you, you helped me navigate it. I wish I could have been able to do it a lot more, but life happens.
Yeah, exactly.
But just, I appreciate you for your kindness and your patience and your friendship, and not a lot of people nowadays are able to do what you're doing. So again, greatly appreciative of what you're doing, not only with the family and the kids, but everyone else. I see how you interact with the people at the gym, and so I can honestly say that you are a good man. I don't know what you do at home, so I'm pretty sure it correlates. If you're not a good person at home, it's going to be hard to be outside of the home. But thank you, man. I greatly appreciate it.
Appreciate
I have so much more questions after the podcast than I did before, and so maybe another day, another podcast we'll be able to do. But hey, I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
I always appreciate it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. As always, that's the end of the first episode of the Fallen Faith Podcast, A Meal and a Conversation. And just like that, as always, God loves you. I love you. God bless and stay safe. Thank y'all. Love y'all. Peace.